Welcome to the High Voltage Light Electric Vehicle channel. This video is going to be mostly a bunch of riding footage with the DM01, which is the larger of the two motors made by TOSEVEN Motor. I've been riding about most of the week with the DM01, and these are going to be my thoughts on it so far. Actually, it's going to be my thoughts on both of the new motors so far. So the DM01 shown here in the video is 30 amps, which at 52 volts gives a max power of 1700 watts. An interesting thing to note though is that I've been told the maximum voltage that the controller can handle stock is a 17S battery, which at 30 amps is about 2000 watts. So far on the road, I've found that it eats up the hills where I live with ease, and it's not having any issues that I've found so far with the temperature, even with the heat being about 25-30 C here lately. Using the torque sensor, you can get up to 50 kilometers an hour easily on the flat and 30 kilometers an hour pretty easily on the hills as well. It reminds me very much of riding my stock BBS HD, with the one important difference, which is the addition of the torque sensor. I think for a long time there was this kind of vain hope that Bafang were going to make a BBS HD with a torque sensor, and now we have CYC with their Photon and TOSEVEN here with two new torque sensing motors. So the DIY mid-drive market has got a huge boost, I think, in terms of conversion motors. There are actually another couple of companies that I know that are working on similar sort of conversion motors. And Bafang, yeah, they've actually put a torque sensor on the BBS HD, but then unfortunately they also went down then and locked the entire ecosystem, so they're also forcing product on you with their battery as well. I'm really happy that both this motor and the O2 are going to be UART, which means they'll be open to being programmed as people see fit. I'm just kind of getting to grips with the parameters so far at the moment, and most of this week's riding has been to get a baseline, I guess, of how the motor performs before I start changing settings to refine it. So I actually made a cover, which I'll show you here, underneath, and that hides the wiring that's coming down underneath of the motor. I think long term a design change in that area would be advantageous, but for now this is going to do the job and it'll stop debris from damaging the wires there. I had actually been expecting to be starting this week with the O2 motor. I ran into a firmware issue, unfortunately, though. Apparently, I hold the record for being the fastest to trigger that. So while it's off the bike, I took the opportunity to take it apart. Apparently, there are lots of people that use the Tongsheng motor, and they're interested in seeing the internals and the differences between this motor and the Tongsheng motor. So the DM02 here is similar in many respects, but differences in machining and assembly are the key reasons why this motor should perform significantly better when it comes to shedding heat in particular. The key thing is the stator, and which is essentially like the core of the motor here, has been pressed into a precision machine cavity. Right, so this part's been cast and then it's been machined, and that means that there's a very tight tolerance around the edge here and ensures that there is good heat transfer from the stator here directly to the motor casing so it can shed it. If you've watched the video, I watched a couple of the Tongsheng motor being taken apart. You can see that this casing essentially lifts off the motor with the Tongsheng, and that's the result of a cast cover rather than a machine fit. So there's essentially an air gap around the entire stator there. The Tongsheng motor is not one I've ever used, mainly because it was rumored to have issues with it. I've seen, actually looking on the net, all sorts of really inventive things that people have done to basically fix this design flaw. Motors with huge external heat sinks on them. People have put shims in and around here and everything to try and get better heat transfer. There's some pictures on the screen right now showing what some of the things that have been done. So this essentially here is the biggest single difference in terms of performance, I think. There are lots of other differences with things like the waterproofing, the way the sprag clutch has been done, and I'll go over that when I do a full review of all the internals. I do need to confirm a few things first and make sure that the information that I'm giving out is correct. If you have any specific questions about this, please post them in the comments. I'm going to be posting questions that I get and that I have myself directly to the motor designer, and I'm going to go over with all those answers in a much more detailed look at this motor next week, probably. I want to get all the questions over on Sunday night, so if there's anything that you want asked about this motor, please post it in the comments or on Discord before then. The rest of this video is going to be my thoughts on the DM01 and TOSEVEN in general, and to make it a bit more interesting, there'll be some ride footage you can see while I'm talking. So overall, I'm enjoying using the DM01. With a 52 volt battery at 30 amps, it puts out the same amount of power as a BBS HD. It has a very similar feel to it with the throttle. It has the same overbuilt feel to its construction. It's also not hard to see it being pushed pretty far beyond its rated limits, which is also kind of like the BBS HD. The big difference though is the torque sensor, and when I take this motor apart we can look at the internal differences as well. If you don't want to wait, you can also watch the video that I linked to in the description. Overall, I really like the torque sensor. Right now, I'd say it's not quite as refined as the one on the CYC Photon, but I have a feeling with some tuning, it will be a lot closer. I think it's much better than the Ultra motors that I've tried. I think the input is far more responsive. I'm trying to get in a fair bit of riding before I start to play about with some of the settings. I've got everything on a spreadsheet with the different values, so I can record what I'm changing and what effect this has on the feel of the bike. In terms of parameters and programming screens, I've put all the information that I've obtained so far onto Discord, so if you want to see the different display screens and parameters, you can get a PDF of that on there. When you have a torque-based system, you actually have two sensors that work together. There's a magnet-based input that lets the controller know when the cranks are moving and how fast they're moving on RPM or pedal RPM, and that's commonly 12 magnets arranged in a circle. The second part is the strain sensor, and that measures the force being put into the pedals, and it's a combination of those two that make the system operate. The result is about 12 parameters that are available to determine how the controller interprets input from the sensors and then directs the motor to perform. I just need to fiddle about with all those until I get the right ones for me. I'm going to post updates on the Discord rooms for TOSEVEN so people there can follow along with things. It feels like this just needs to be kind of refined a bit more. It's really good at delivering lots of power in a way that still feels very natural. There are just a few little quirks that need to be ironed out, and hopefully that won't take too long. The beauty is that because this is not a lockdown system, people will be able to do this themselves. I think that there is also a set of values that would suit the majority that should go on at the factory, but it's likely that at the dealer level they can put their own twist on things depending on the rider's requirements. The throttle response is pretty much the same as I remember with the BBS HD. I actually prefer the pedal assist here now that it's there, because trying to use pedal assist at 1500 watts with the BBS HD was pretty dangerous. But with the torque sensor delivery, it's much smoother. It basically means that accelerating with the pedals is actually more responsive and quicker than using the throttle in most cases, especially when going uphill. I can definitely do some throttle-only riding if people would like me to. This will probably be the easiest part, I think, to tune. There seems to be a bit of deadband on it right now, so I want to see if I can reduce that. I also need to fix the GPS situation so I can show you guys speeds while I'm riding. The most I got up to, it gets up to about 60 relatively easily, and you've got to really work hard to push it beyond that. In terms of temperature and thermal performance, the motor casing with the DM01 and the 02 are lacking the kind of fins that you get with the BBS HD, but even so it seems to be handling the heat. Right now there seems to be a bit of a bug with the display on the motor temperature, so I'm not actually sure what the exact temperature is reading. That said, I've climbed the same hills that I've done with the BBS HD with stock, and I've tried holding my hand on the outer part of the core, and it feels very similar to what I was getting with that motor, in that I can hold my hand on there relatively comfortably for a decent period of time. So I'm thinking it's getting hot, but within limits. I've not managed to get it to register higher than 45 on the controller temperature reading. I'm going to see if I can dig out my thermal temperature probe for some external readings. Hopefully, like a firmware update or something, we'll get the reading for the motor temperature. The motor is designed to limit the power available to prevent damage from overheating, and I'm curious to see if it's just the reading that's absent or if it's not functional at all. I've asked some questions as to where the sensors are located to try and find out more. So far it's a bit of a moot point because I haven't got the temperature anywhere high enough to want that throttling to kick in normal riding conditions. I would also like to see the temperature readings on the display, like the main display, so I know where I'm sitting at any point, especially on like longer climbs. In terms of the wiring, I made that cover plate for the wiring that exits the motor underneath to protect them from debris. Long term, I think there are a few small redesigns that can be made in that area that will see the wires exit differently, so they're better protected. There's a bit of a stopgap measure for this for the time being with what I did. I've made a few recommendations about the wire length as well, being basically shortened to accommodate the most common size of bicycle, and then having extensions available if someone wants to install them on like a recumbent or a tandem bike. So not major stuff, but little things that would make the difference when it comes to putting this on a bike and having the job look really neat and tidy. In terms of modifying the motor and pushing it, I think there is some room to do this for sure. Actually, I think there'll be some room to push the O2 motor as well a bit further. I think once these start to get shipped out and onto bikes, people will be trying all sorts of different things with them. We're going to be experimenting with them on the high voltage test rig with external controllers, but really anyone can get hold of one of these and hook it up and be able to use all the features, including the torque sensor. In terms of gear changing the gear sensor, I'm not missing the gear sensor. I haven't put it on. I would like though a brake sensor for the front, or at least a button so I can disengage the torque sensor input at standstill, because right now it's very sensitive and even a light touch is triggering it, which is a little bit annoying at standstill and possibly dangerous in a crowd, because it's just a bit lurchy and jumpy, and it'd be nice to be able to sit at a stop and rest my foot on the pedal and just have a cutoff activated until it's time to move, and then the motor would basically trigger as soon as I release the brake. And I think TOSEVEN should look at supplying just cutoffs and not the whole mechanical brake unit, because not that many people these days use like mechanical disc brakes even on e-bikes. Maybe they can supply a hydraulic brake set to go with it. I was concerned during the build of the bike whether it would stay in one place on the frame in the absence of teeth on the lock ring, and also using the supplied tool to tighten it. So far it's not come loose and I can't see any movement. When I put it on, I got about as tight as I could by hand and gave it a few whacks with a hammer to put a bit of extra torque in it, and I did the same with the lock ring for the chain ring. The display is perfectly adequate. The button response is nice and firm. It's bright enough to ensure you can read during the day even in full sunlight, until you put sunglasses on, and then it's unreadable, unfortunately. It's not the first display to have this particular issue. It's a bit annoying at the moment though, because it's bright as hell and I want to wear my sunglasses, but I also want to be able to observe the settings and make changes when I'm playing about with parameters. I have some ideas as to how things could be improved in this area, and I don't think it's going to take too much resources to pull it off. I think with the UART nature of the controller, other displays will be usable down the road. The control system I covered more extensively in another video, but it is very comprehensive. I don't know of any other motor controller combination that gives this level of control just with the display screen and a keypad. It's a bit clunky with the passwords, and I have managed to shut one of them off. The functionality is there, I think it just needs to be organised more efficiently. I've posted all the screens from the menus along with as much information as to what they do, and you can get those from Discord if you're interested. The controller might actually be a bit more powerful than I'd first understood. It's definitely FOC based, and there's a little bit that I'm not able to discuss publicly right now, but I can say that the maximum voltage that can be run stock is 17S, which is one more cell than a 60-volt battery at 16S. The Q factor right now is 245mm on the DM01, and I forgot to measure the O2 before I took it off the motor, but I think it's about the same at the moment, which is pretty wide.
The good news is that I think it can be reduced to at least 210 on the DM01, and I have a feeling that it can be reduced to under 200 on the DM02 just by changing the crank design, and like that would be a super quick win there. I think that's the overall message here, is that the motors clearly have potential, and I get the feeling that with the DM02 it's going to do most of what the Photon can do. It might not be quite as flashy with the phone app or as punchy in like unrestricted mode that you get with the Photon, but I think it's likely to be about as powerful as the Photon sustained, and probably a much cheaper price point. I'm not able to give information about the pricing because that's something for dealers to set, but I think it's going to be reasonable, and I'm pretty sure you should be able to get like a pretty nice battery and an O2, for example, for less than $1,000. And right now the Photon is definitely the more refined motor in operation. Like the package it comes with is more premium and slick, but there are lots of easy wins that I see with the 2.7 motor that could close the gap on that. The cranks are an easy win, offering a high grade of accessory, especially like the throttle and the brake cutoffs, refining the menu system so it's less clunky, send the motors out with more refined base settings and make it like really clear what to do in order to change the behavior of operation. Like, I think if they can get to 85% of the Photon but at a significantly lower price point, then they ought to do well. And I think there's plenty of room for this to exist alongside the Photon, which I think is clearly aimed at like a more premium market. There are lots of people that don't want to spend that kind of money on an e-bike motor, so I think the DM02 will fill that gap. The DM01 is very much aimed at filling the slot that Bafang seem to want to vacate, and that's going to be like the go-to motor if you need bomb-proof transport, something that's easy to fix. And I'm hopeful it will be exactly the motor that we kind of hoped that Bafang would make. Right now this is all very early days. I'm excited though that we have these new motors. The more players that we get in this area, then the better as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to be continuing riding with the DM01. I'm going to start to post information on the things that I'm testing on Discord if people want to follow along with that, or even join in if you have one of these motors already, because there are a few out in the wild. So don't forget to post your questions for 2.7 in the comments on Discord. Thanks for watching the High Voltage channel, and a huge thanks to all the channel members who make this possible. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.